Hello,
Hello
there.
there. Welcome back to another episode of Star Wars in the Galaxy, watching all the Star Wars we can get our hands on. I'm Eli.
I'm Jacob.
And today we are back with season 16 of Star Wars in the Galaxy. It's been a while since we recorded episode 1, but we are back with episode 2, Obi-Wan Kenobi. Jacob, anything you want to say before we get our guest on to talk with us about part 2 of Obi-Wan Kenobi?
No, bring on the guests. Let's do it.
All right. From the GALactic podcast, it is our good friend of the show, second time guest on Star Wars in the Galaxy. It is Lauren Romo here. Lauren, welcome back to the show. I think this is the first time you've been on with Jacob. I think I did a theme between themes with you a few years ago, but
yes, that sounds correct. That does sound correct. Yes. Hey, Jacob, how you doing, sir?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing good. I'm very excited to be here. Talk about Obi-Wan Part 2.
Obi-Wan Kenobi Part 2. What a spectacular episode of Star Wars television. Jacob, do you want to give us a quick summary of the episode before we begin?
So, Obi-Wan tracks the kidnappers to the planet DAIYU and encounters the con man Haja Estree, the fake Jedi. Now, Haja directs Kenobi to Princess Leia's location, where he defeats the kidnappers and he manages to rescue her. However, the Grand Inquisitor learns that Obi-Wan is in the city on DAIYU and locks the entire place down. Now he tells Reva to leave Obi-Wan alone and not to go after him, but Reva disobeys the orders and sends out a signal to all the scum and villainy of DAIYU that there's a bounty on Obi-Wan. Leia actually sees one of these bounty holograms, and she actually susses out that Obi-Wan is the real reason that she's there, as she says, and she tells him that she says, you're the reason I'm here. I can't trust you anymore. I'm only bait. And she runs away from him. So he follows her onto the rooftops. And Leia tries to jump from one roof to another, but it's too far. And she falls. But Obi-Wan taps into the Force and saves her from falling to her death, which kind of regains her trust, since she was saying, you're not a real Jedi, you're not a real Jedi. And now, lo and behold, he is a real Jedi. Haja Estree finds them again and gives them instructions to an unguarded cargo port from which they can escape. But Reva still follows them. Haja cannot stop Reva, unsurprisingly. And Reva, while she's closing in on Obi-Wan, reveals that Anakin is Darth Vader and that he is still alive. Kenobi is absolutely shocked because he, of course, thought Anakin had died 10 years ago. The Grand Inquisitor arrives to arrest Obi-Wan, but Reva turns on him, impales him with her lightsaber, and in the process, unfortunately for them, allows Kenobi and Leia to escape. And finally, we get that one-shot Darth Vader awakening in his bacta tank.
What an episode. It's episode 2, part 2 of Kenobi. Lauren, actually, I feel like I need to ask you this. Were you at Celebration 2022?
I was in Anaheim, California.
Did you see this episode?
I was not lucky enough to be in the room when they did that, but I was there, me and my roommate, Katie. We watched it in our hotel room on our phones because, just a quick, really random story. I brought like my Apple TV thing to connect it to like the hotel TV. Did not work. So we had
it didn't.
So we had to use our cell phones and watched it. So it was an interesting experience. But for this episode, this is the one, because it was a 2-part drop, right? So this is how that episode, the second episode, ended, and you were just like, oh wow, didn't hold anything back. They brought Vader, they brought the whole vodka tank, that's Hayden in there. It was really interesting. It was a really good episode. So I'm really excited to talk about it because there's a lot of good stuff in here.
I honestly cannot say I remember the first time I watched this episode. So I think I told the story last episode. I did not realize that. So we were at Anaheim for the last 2 days. We did not see Obi-Wan at the panel. And because I knew they were showing Obi-Wan at the panel, I decided I'm going to stay off the internet for the rest of that night, not knowing that they would drop it early that night. So
right, that was the thing. I forgot about that. They dropped it early.
They dropped it early, and I just didn't know. So I woke up that morning because I was just so excited to get down to Celebration later that day at like 4 a.m. or something like that. and I watched those 2 episodes, and viewing session was just literally me, literally a few feet behind where I am now, just sitting on the couch and just watching this thing. I don't remember much from the first watch along. I remember seeing Alderaan for the first time. I remember seeing him in the desert and all that kind of stuff. I do remember the Vader stuff for the first time, but honestly, so much of that is a blur, even though I have gone back and watched this since then. But wow, this is just such a little spoiler from my opinion about this episode, which is that somehow this is my second least favorite episode of this season, and I still love it. I still have very little to criticize about it. That is how immaculate this show ends up for me. That is how just over the top good it ends up for me.
Yeah, I enjoyed this episode as well. I feel the first part 1 was certainly didn't lack for being exciting. Not to say that, but it did feel the warm up in a way, putting all the pieces in place. Just the playing off just the awe and the emotional payoff of seeing people like Ewan McGregor be Obi-Wan again, and is it Jimmy Smits, I believe?
Yep.
There we go, as Bail again. And I feel like this episode is like all of a sudden so much anticipation. All of a sudden, boom, we're off to the races. The chase through a DAIYU, the amazing kind of space meth lab, Breaking Bad-esque scene. That always really cracks me up. It's a very enjoyable episode. I'm not totally sold on the way, and this is my one big gripe about all of Kenobi's. I'm not totally sold on how they parse out the overall time and attention of the show. I feel, hey, the stuff of the show, that's what's the most compelling about this show is, to me, Obi-Wan and Leia, their relationship and Obi-Wan's emotional journey. We should get a little more time just to see that unfold. I get that this is a modern, fast-paced show, but it should be able to breathe a little bit more, that part of the story, in my opinion.
Let's get into it as a whole. I just want to first say that no one can ever convince me that the opening intro for Obi-Wan Kenobi is not the best intro we've ever seen for anything Star Wars. Like the sand melting into. I think I will probably I will look back at the end of the season. I will have commented on. I will have commented on the intro 6 different times during this season, probably 7, honestly, because I love it so much. I just love it, and I can't I just can't not mention it. But no, we first step onto DAIYU, which is the planet that's right behind me that I have in my screensaver right now. Which I have to first give a shout out to our to our friends Alden and Jerry and Michael and Jared and Dan, who run a series, an RPG series called Ionized Bastards, which I love. And one of the characters, Alden's character, Thabor Sheens, his office is on the planet of DAIYU. So I was looking around this episode just to see where I could retcon Thabor Sheens' office in. And also the first episode of season 2 of Ionized Bastards, which came out pretty recently, starts on the planet of DAIYU. Fun little detail there. But yeah, no, it's this I believe Deborah Chow said she modeled it after Tokyo. I think that's what she said.
That makes sense. It definitely has that Tokyo feel to it, for sure. I could see that. That makes a ton of sense.
Yeah. Oh, no, Hong Kong.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hong
That
Kong.
makes sense
Yeah,
as
Hong
well.
Kong.
I mean,
Yeah. Hong Kong. Yeah. And it's this. I love the immediate contrast it sets up from Tatooine. We have these two very distinct planets from each other. We have, and I also like that Nikki last episode was talking to us about how this is maybe in his opinion one of the productions that was the most impacted by COVID. And I thought this episode masked that really well. Because it did seem like they were going through a lot of large, bustling crowds. This episode, I know that Obi-Wan Kenobi gets a lot of flack for the volume and its usage in this series. Maybe I'm not as good at seeing it. I don't know what it is, but I think it looks fine. I really do. I think it looks fine. I think I know there are some other stuff with some of the stormtroopers in part 4, I believe it is. that people are like, and I get that. Or part 5, I think it is. Yeah, part 5, where people are like, is that all the stormtroopers? But I understand if people feel differently.
I definitely feel like there's moments, maybe not necessarily to me, not necessarily in this episode. There are moments where it feels like the technology maybe isn't fully all the way there yet. But I really enjoyed DAIYU. At least I thought that, like you said, I thought it was cool that we had Obi-Wan. Of course, as soon as he decides to get back in the saddle, he goes to everything he's unaccustomed to, everything he's uncomfortable with from what we know about him in the Clone Wars, in the even in the originals. He calls Mos Espa the wretched hive of scum and villainy, obviously extremely famous line. He doesn't like places like this. He doesn't like hanging out with big crowds of people, with the characters of maybe varying levels of repute. That's not really his thing at all. So it's cool to see his discomfort with what's happening and his kind of the journey that he's taking of taking this big step back into this world that he has left behind and given up on. That's borne out and mirrored a little bit in the setting in which they're in and the way that he interacts with it, which I think is a cool way to set things off.
Yeah, I agree with you, Jacob. It's an interesting contrast between, again, Tatooine that Nikki talked about last week versus this type of environment. And it's nothing that we've seen in Star Wars before. You could say maybe Coruscant.
Yeah,
that's even
yeah.
But that even has a different feel than what DAIYU has.
Absolutely.
You could also argue, I guess, Canto Bight, but even that's one yacht, basically, and like one city that we see, like, clearly on a planet that is not like, this seems all-consuming,
Right.
the city and the terrestrial.
And then to your point, too, Jacob, about Obi-Wan and how he interacts with this environment, you can tell it's very, again, the situation, obviously, he's trying to find Leia, right? But he is he's uncomfortable a little bit, right? Trying to navigate through this new planet that maybe he's, as far as we know, he's never been to before, and trying to weave his way through it without showing himself as a Jedi or showing who he is. It's interesting to see how he plays it off. And Eli, I think you're right too, where you brought up the impact it had post COVID. It's interesting that, like you're saying, it seems like it had a decent crowd, right? But they managed it very well. And I think they use even little tricks too, like when he was going through the meth lab, they had him
tricks, yeah.
And then they would have him like wearing a mask right through the meth lab. So like they did little things that helped that they could get through it, push through the process that what they had to go through production wise, going through that time. And then again, the volume, I think both you guys hit on it. It's a ever evolving technology, and at the time, it was probably better than what we had seen it before. But now, having seen it on Mandalorian season 3 or even Ahsoka, you see how it's gotten better. So it for its time, I think it worked really well, and especially in this episode, I agree with you, Jacob. It was hard for me. It was even because I'm one of those. Sometimes I can tell like where it ends and begins, like depth versus the front and everything. But this did a really good job. I think it did a really good job of blending everything, what the volume can really use and do well. They used it to its potential, and they did a really good job with it. I think in that respect, for me anyway.
I really don't like or agree with, and I'm not saying that either of you have perpetuated this at all. I think quite the opposite. I really do just want to say that I quite hate the volume bad discourse that seems to perpetuate many parts of the Star Wars fandom.
Agreed.
When we had when really the first time people started noticing the volume, from my recollection, the first time people started noticing the volume was in the 3rd Star Wars series with it. We went 2 entire seasons of Star Wars television with no one noticing it. And then the speeder bikes ran too slow in Book of Boba Fett, and the chase was awkwardly paced in part 1 of this, and there were too few stormtroopers in this. And then suddenly everybody was acting like it was the problem the entire time. I just think that, as Lauren said, and I really do think this is true, it's an ever-evolving technology. Star Wars has been no stranger to being on the cutting edge of technology and utilizing it for its storytelling. And I think that I think people need to give John and Dave and Deb now more credit in the realm of the volume, because again, it is an extremely new technology. The Mandalorian was literally the first show to use it, and it is they've made pretty clear that we have not gotten close to the limits of this thing. That it is such a I can't help but be transfixed by the volume sometimes, really, just because it's just so crazy to me.
So now, especially movie studios, not just Lucasfilm, right? A lot of the Marvel stuff is shot on that now.
Yeah.
The Batman was shot. Some of that was shot on it. So yeah, like you're saying,
And
ever evolving.
I remember specifically people were like, "Oh, thank God Andor is not shot on the volume." That's not true.
Au contraire.
We know that Mon's apartment was shot in the volume. Everything else wasn't, but Mon's apartment was, and nobody could tell.
And I agree with what both of you are saying, but I think as well, it's not a matter necessarily of saying that to disagree somewhat. I don't think it's a matter necessarily of just saying the volume is bad, but rather it is a technology in its infancy, relatively speaking. And with that in mind, how do the directors and how do we decide to use it? And I think that we saw it being used maybe less effectively, at least in my opinion. Still very effective most of the time, but maybe less effective than it had been in The Mandalorian, in moments in the Book of Boba Fett, moments in Kenobi. But I think you're right. I think that just blaming the volume is not necessarily the solution. I think that ultimately, Lauren, like you said, Eli, like you said, this is Star Wars pushing the technology of making movies and now TV forward and introducing new technologies and new techniques. That's in Star Wars's DNA since the very beginning. And for better or for worse, I think the price to pay of that is sometimes things don't always look perfect. Sometimes things don't necessarily hold up to the eye test. On the second watch through, the prequels nowadays sometimes get a little bit of grief. Parts of them don't look extraordinary to the modern eye. And yet we know what they did for the industry. And I think that I wonder if we'll look back on these early works that use the volume extensively in the same way. Because I will admit, it's really hard to tell for me, but there are moments when I think to myself, I know Star Wars can do better than what I'm seeing right now in this show and in Boba Fett and moments. And that's not to say that I want to rag on him or say that it's necessarily the volume's fault, because it could be any number of things. It could be the unionization situation with any number of other, the costuming department, the art department, things like that. I'll cut myself off, but I guess what I'm saying is I agree with you guys. It's not really the volume's fault. It's how we use that technology.
I think some of it too, real quick, but I think it depends too on the environment, right? Like when you're on Tatooine, it's just sand and like hills, so there's not much. Like when
you're on a more isolated planet, like the planet in The Passenger,
right? So, but when you go into an environment like this, like DAIYU, you can really, I think, get good perception, depth perception, and show that city skyline and everything, and it's going to look good. And I think, Jacob, you really nailed it. I think, and we're all talking about the evolution of what Star Wars has done in the special effects like realm of it. Think back to even to the original Star Wars, right? Let's be honest, even when I watch A New Hope, it looks dated. Let's not kid ourselves. Like
it's from 1977.
Exactly. But then you juxtapose that though when they go to the prequels. Gee, that's the big kind of thing that was going, and it at its time it was good. But then again, you watch it back, you're like, okay. But again, because of what they did, how many movies have we all seen now that are CGI, blue screen, green screen,
Yeah.
because of George.
Yeah,
And because
of
of
George.
because of what he wanted to push. And now this is like his symphony. This is what he's always wanted to be able to do, right? Like the volume is like where he always wanted to go with his stuff, right? To be able to do what they're doing. And again, it for this episode, especially on DAIYU, it looked fantastic for me. Again, especially at night, it looked really good. I think again, that's even again to do day and night stuff. That's got to be tough too. But within the setting that they are in this episode, I loved it. They did a really good job using the volume at that time, and it looks good to me. And like you're saying, Jacob, I agree. It's hard for me to see it, but like when I do notice it, I notice it. It's hard not to see it, but they do a really good job of blending it, though. They really do. I think they do a fantastic job.
For me, it's just, and I'll just wrap this up by saying this, which is Return of the Jedi. God love that movie. It's my favorite Star Wars movie. But you see that Luke kick at Jabba's palace.
The fandom kick, the force kick,
the infamous kick.
That kick
kick
makes me so forgiving to any and all future Star Wars VFX stuff. Like, if I can forgive that, which I can, like, pretty much, yeah. So what if the environments look a little bit?
Agreed.
But I do just want to say, because we were talking about like, Lucas's tendency to push things forward, I do just want to remind people, and again, I'm preaching to the choir here because I'm sure our listeners know this, but George Lucas looked around and didn't see any viable VFX companies for A New Hope in 77 and said, fuck it, I'll do it live, and made his own VFX company.
Like, and look what they are now. ILM is
the absolute.
They do everything. They are almost in everything. Yeah. Any movie, any special effects stuff, they're part of it. Like easily, you'll see in the credits. ILM.
But
they're part
the absolute just manic energy of I'm gonna do this myself, and he did that, by the way, with Skywalker sound as well. With Lucasfilm Animation Studios for the Clone Wars originally. That was built from the ground freaking up.
I love it.
It's great how Star Wars pushes the technology forward. I want to talk about what we start to see on DAIYU with our first little cameo, which hey internet, this is actually how you use the word cameo, which is Obi-Wan walking around DAIYU, and then he sees somebody slumped against a pole. You have a few credits to spare for a veteran. And you zoom in, and it's Temuera Morrison and Ewan McGregor acting opposite each other, even if for 10 seconds for the first time in 17 years.
Jeez.
Which is just incredible. We've since learned from the excellent book that I have in the other room, Dawn of Rebellion. Lord praise Pablo Hidalgo and Emily Shkukani for providing those great details for Obi-Wan Andor that I've so wanted for quite a while in that new book. We now know that clone trooper's name is Nax. He's survived Christophsis, I believe. I believe it's Christophsis. I know. I don't know if it's Christophsis. I know it's Teth, and I know it's Umbara. I know he survived Umbara. So he survived Pong Krill. So I think he's unstoppable.
Fuck that guy.
Yeah, but I legitimately, I think I tweeted this a while ago. I'm like, I think I texted a friend about this. I'm like, Lucasfilm, hey Eli, which male characters with the DNA of Jango Fett do you want Temuera Morrison playing in Star Wars? Me, yes. I want him to be in as much Star Wars as humanly possible. We've seen Jango, we've seen Rex. I want to see the Bad Batch. We've seen Boba, obviously. I want to see Jango again. Do it all. Pay that man what he wants, and get him in as many Star Wars projects while we still have the time. Because he's, in his early 60s now?
He'd do it, obviously. He's having a ball.
That's the other thing. He loves this shit. He loves it.
Yeah, I remember I saw him. He was doing something up on stage at one of the main stage at Celebration, the one where you can just go up at any time, where it's not really any scheduled events. He was just messing around up there, man. He looked like he was having such a good time. I don't know how. I feel so lucky that we have a lot of actors in Star Wars like him who are really into this shit, because I feel like it could get pretty tiring, just dealing with a fan base as passionate
And it's
as this
toxic.
one.
We'll say the T word. It's
The
toxic.
T word.
We will say the T word. I've gone through way too many tweets of Star Wars theory recently to not say the T word. All right, anyway,
Whole other episode.
whole other episode there. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
But I thought it was really interesting that they did this though. That I was definitely caught off surprise when they brought in like a veteran Clone War guy, clone trooper, struggling on the streets. I thought it was a really interesting choice to put that in this show and have that interaction with Obi-Wan. But it makes so much sense because he interacted with the clones a ton, as we know.
Yeah, absolutely.
So,
The
like,
thing that struck me the most is that last time he saw clones, they tried to kill him.
right, he was killing
And-
them on Coruscant when him and Yoda
he
went back
killed them
to
on
the
Coruscant.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For some reason, often that part of the movie where they go back, the part of Sith where they go back, just slips through my brain sometimes. So
Me
I
too.
think,
I don't know why.
So I think, he survived Utapau, then went straight to Tatooine for some reason. No, or not went straight to Tatooine. He survived Utapau, went straight to Mustafar, and then went to Tatooine. He didn't see clones, but no, you're absolutely right. He was killing them. There are those great memes where Ahsoka and Rex, come on, we cannot kill these people. They're good people. And Yoda's like, okay, come here, you little shit.
Yoda just going absolute. I can't get that image out of my mind. In the demi in the background while Obi-Wan's doing something in this one shot, I can't remember. Yoda just going absolutely berserk on some horror clone. Just unbelievable stuff.
It's great.
Yeah.
The other fun Easter egg I wanted to point out that happens in the very beginning, actually this is the third one too, but we'll get there, was that woman who approaches Obi-Wan at the beginning, who is played by Esther McGregor, who is Ewan's daughter. I gotta say, the McGregor family is doing really great for themselves in Star Wars these days, with Ewan returning as Obi-Wan, with Esther getting this brief little cameo, and then of course with Mary as Hera and Ahsoka.
Right.
They're having a good few years.
They're thriving.
Yeah, they're thriving.
Sure.
And the irony of Esther McGregor saying to her own father in character, "I was somebody's daughter once too," is definitely not lost on me this time. I totally missed it on the first time.
That's a line. That is a line.
Yeah.
That is a line said by Esther McGregor to her father in character is just
Right.
it's a little
Very meta. It's meta.
very meta. It's extremely meta, and I love it.
Yeah. And they played it so well too. Like that had to be like a very, I can only imagine for you and his daughter to be on a set like that and to be in a show like this and for her to have that little cameo, right? That's got to be such a
Yeah.
cool thing for him and her to experience. So it's a nice little touch that, again, it's not like Deborah Chow had to do that, right?
No,
But
absolutely
they're
not.
probably
Yeah.
like, hey, would you mind? Or
I
is
was
this
also
cool?
an exec producer on it, so I'm sure.
Right, true, fair, fair.
Input on that, but no, that there was a moment, and I cannot believe this is the first time I'm using this meme in this season, because it seems so strange to me that it didn't come up at all in our last episode, which is that normally she sees her dad as Ewan, as somebody she knows, but probably on that set she probably got into her place for the beginning of the scene, and she just looked around and she probably just said to herself, "It's fucking Obi-Wan Kenobi."
I could see that. That'd be really funny.
If I have time to edit that line in, the clip in from Graham Norton's show, I will. Rent free in my brain. That will always live rent free in my brain.
It's one of the best. It's one of the best clips.
It's great. Then we get, of course, to Haja Estree, which I gotta say, when I first heard that Kumail Nanjiani was going to be in Obi-Wan Kenobi, my eyebrows raised a little bit. I was like, not that he's not a great actor and not that he's not a very funny guy and a great comedian. I'm just like, him and Obi-Wan? But I'll say it, he surprised me. He definitely surprised me.
I loved it. He was so good. Like, it is such a perfect character, almost. Like, for him to play like a con man playing a Jedi, like it just feels like that's up his alley. It's something that he could really sink his like comedic chops into and really play it
100%.
up. So
Yeah.
I loved it. And it's a fascinating concept too for someone to portray and pretend to be a Jedi, right? When you know, or you would think people understand that's a dangerous thing to say or to
Yeah.
act,
Especially on a
right?
planet
It's a
like DAIYU.
bold move. Interesting, like an interesting con for this character to come up with, for Haji to be like, I'm gonna play a Jedi, but I'm gonna act like I'm gonna have the magnets, the remotes, I'll have a big thing. Like and for them to think that's a good idea in that environment, it's a
Yeah.
fascinating. I think that was just like what I was watching it earlier, and I was just like that. For some reason, that caught me. I'm like, that's just a fascinating concept for somebody to think of, in the galaxy, to be like, I'm gonna play a Jedi, a fake Jedi. That's a bold con, man, and clearly he was doing it
Absolutely.
pretty
Yeah.
well. Clearly, he
Yeah.
was doing it pretty well.
Yeah.
What I
Lauren, I think you
specifically go
I
ahead.
think you bring up a great point. Thank you, Lauren, about like how dangerous potentially it actually is. And I have very mixed feelings about Haja Estree and his role in this episode because on the one hand, I love Kumail Nanjiani. I was a
Mhm.
huge Silicon Valley fan. I was
Good show.
watching that a few years back. That he did an amazing job. If you haven't watched it, go watch The Big Sick. Fantastic movie, and I love what he does. But I felt like I wasn't sure that it felt like the right decision for this episode, for the overall cohesion of the episode, to have him be so funny. And I loved it. Like in isolation, I did love that. But also, I feel like the actual concept of what we're dealing with here, of Obi-Wan, a fallen Jedi in hiding, everyone thinks all the Jedi are dead, and he actually sees someone using like his
Exactly.
religion, like you get to make it feel personal to us. See someone use like his religion, like how would that make me feel, something like that. And then I was thinking, man, like they don't really get into like necessarily as I think that they could, what an intense experience that must be for him, and how that affects him and makes him think about everything. That now you have the only Jedi. The Jedi are supposed to be the symbol of hope and justice in the galaxy, and now the only Jedi these people are ever going to know until he shows up is this guy who's a con man. And yeah, I love that. I love how funny Kumail is. I think he does a great job for sure with the role and how they seem to want to do it. But with that being said, I still feel like if they had taken it in a more serious direction, they could have gotten something potentially even better. And I wish they'd done that also for the sake of. I feel like it. I don't know. It takes us too far out of the sense of urgency that we
How does it
had,
do
that
that?
it's injecting so much levity. But with that being said, I think props to Kumail Nanjiani. It's an awesome character, but I wish that they had done it a bit differently, and it ultimately proved to be maybe too much of a good thing.
How is it too much of a good thing?
I just think that if they had toned down the humor, I think that and taken it in a bit more of a serious direction, they could have gotten to some, like I was saying, and going off of what Lauren was saying about the decision to be a Jedi conman and how it affects Obi-Wan and his emotional response to it, knowing everything that he's gone through, to see someone like be an imposter using the name and the trappings of the Jedi in such a way. I feel like they could have gotten something even better had they taken it in a more serious direction. That's what I mean, I guess.
It's an interesting idea, Jacob, because I think I see what you're saying as far as if you tone the comedy just a bit, you can get a little more of a serious tone, obviously, and that would really change, I think, a lot of scenes between them. And I think that would have been an interesting choice too, to really pull the effects it's having on Obi-Wan more than just him seeing some lackey, right, trying to be a Jedi and playing it as a con and as a funny guy, which Kumail does a great job of. But I see what you're saying, where if you tone that down just a little, pull up the seriousness, you could maybe dive into that idea that you're talking about, that we're talking about, of the effect it has on Obi-Wan, and then just the choice of that character wanting to do that, right? Because he could have played any other type of con man, right? But he chose to be a Jedi. So like, why did Haji feel like portraying a Jedi was the best way to do what he was doing? And I
Yeah.
think it plays out if you think about it, obviously later on in the series, not to get too far, but like, he was, he was doing it for a good cause, as we know. Like, he was trying to get these kids that have the Force. He was trying to get them in a safe place. So he had good intentions, but also he had the greed, right? And he was doing it for the money as well. And I think that's, again, if you wrap that all up, that's an interesting character, right? It's
Yeah.
a very
Yeah.
fascinating character. If they
And
could,
what-
if you had more time, obviously with the series, it's limited, and
Yeah, it's not his show, ultimately.
right. But man, I would love, thinking about it now, man, I would love a little bit of a background on him, like
yeah.
why those choices. Again, that's just maybe selfish me, but you could really pull a lot of stuff from that, though. I think for sure.
For me, it's a lot of, I just feel like there's a lot of these characters, especially Haja, I feel like, are pulling things of Obi-Wan, because Obi-Wan, of course, his arc in this is a lot about finding himself again. And for Obi-Wan to go onto a planet and see somebody who looks like a Jedi, but is not a Jedi, it's an interesting, I like that interplay of, okay, so that's not a Jedi, but who gives you the right? What gives you the right to say what a Jedi is anymore? You've been hiding out on Tatooine for 10 years. You have cut yourself off from the Force. Do you even get to say what a Jedi is anymore? And if you do, then what are you going to be as a Jedi? And I think
It's fascinating, yeah.
We see
Yeah.
Leia challenge him on this as well.
Yeah.
Absolutely, that's the other
Yeah.
thing. That
Yeah.
I think Leia does that as well. By this is another thing I was going to say later on, but I'd written in my notes. But by challenging Obi-Wan on you're not a real Jedi, by not believing in him, Leia causes Obi-Wan to further go down the path of believing in himself again,
Mhm.
where she called Obi-Wan's bluff.
Mhm.
He had to reach into the Force to catch her, and only when he believed and when she believed did the episode go more smoothly for them.
And I
Like,
think too, kind of going off what you're saying too, Eli, is that Haja even pushed, obviously, Obi-Wan into seeing that it's important for him to come back, right? It's important for him to believe in the Jedi again, believe in what he believed, right? Because if not, he's staring at a guy that is not, as he knows, not what a Jedi stands for, right? Like,
yeah,
he sees a guy that's just playing games and smoke and mirrors with people's and taking money from them, right? This whole idea of him, that scene, it really struck me today when I was watching it. That scene of him watching Haja do what he was doing. Just to think Obi-Wan must have been so like fuming to know
yeah,
that, man, this is not what we are about. And these
yeah,
people believe him. And it's
yeah.
just, and then for him to, again, for him to call Haja out and to do that, I think, again, with Leia, then later on pushing him, I think, like you're saying, Eli, it pushes him to become more, to
Yeah.
believe in himself more, right? It's the whole start of that journey that we see.
I
And
put in
what
my
makes
notes about that. I put in my notes about that confrontation with Haja at the very beginning. I love the delivery of goodness. That light is unforgiving, but
yeah,
and
Right.
that
He
is a
plays
very
with them
the
with
moment
it. It's
plays
great.
along
and
is hilarious. Yeah,
and that is something that I believe that Obi-Wan as a character probably should be able to say. But
Mhm.
at this point, who are you to judge somebody on the being a Jedi aspect when you have not been putting in the hours over the last 10 years for an understandable reason? Again, Obi-Wan is my second favorite Star Wars character of all time, just behind Yoda. I love this character, but this is a test of if he can get back to being who the galaxy thought he was in the war. And
And
before
Jedi overall, right? Yeah.
and the Jedi overall. And I think that's the arc of he is still holding out hope for the children. And I think he's well guided to hold out hope for the children, but in order for what the children represent to work, what the children do in the future also needs to work.
Mhm.
And I don't think Obi-Wan starts believing in that until this episode.
Yeah. And one more thing before we move on. One more thing about Haja that kind of makes his character, since we're on the topic vaguely, more interesting at the end is he's not just an opportunist. Like maybe he is a believer. Like Lauren, like you said, like of all the things he could have done, being a Jedi, certainly not the lowest profile option if the Empire comes knocking.
Right.
Then again, clearly, like a lot of places in the galaxy in Star Wars, there's a lot of poverty and people turning to crime and various informal extra legal economies to make ends meet. Clearly, that's a big thing in Star Wars.
It's interesting too, because I think you're onto something, Jacob. Because I think Haja did feel like when he realized who Obi-Wan was, he was very like, "Oh wow,
Yeah,
like you actually are the real deal."
there was a respect there that was really interesting to me, and at the end,
Right.
that was what made me think I would like to see more of this guy.
Yeah.
Like, there's more to this. There is a story to be told here. Really, it's not just, oh, the Jedi, they're dead, so I dressed in a bathrobe so I could make money. He's a believer in something. It's not exactly clear what, but he is a believer.
Yeah.
In some
And
capacity.
And it asks that question, which I think actually with Ahsoka now out, I think it's a really is expanding like the literature, you could say, the ongoing ideas in Star Wars of this kind of thing, which is what is a Jedi? Haja is of course not Force sensitive, but there was some greed thrown in there, don't get me wrong, but he was doing something. He was acting as a Jedi to do something that, aside from the credits thing, a Jedi would do. I would argue that actually ties in with Sabine pretty well too, because Sabine was not very highly Force sensitive in Ahsoka, and yet she was doing things. She was fighting for the things that a Jedi, and struggling with the things that a Jedi would struggle with, and fighting for the things the Jedi would fight with. I think we're seeing a slight de-emphasis, and I think this is interesting. I'm not saying that all Jedi shouldn't. I'm not saying that the Force is no longer as important as it once used to be in determining a Jedi. I'm just saying it's no longer maybe the thing that makes or breaks if somebody is a Jedi. That the tradition and the culture and the belief system is actually what makes somebody a Jedi.
I think too, in Ahsoka, she said training, discipline, that's part of it too. So as being
absolutely.
a Jedi, yeah, the whole idea, like you're saying, I think the whole idea, the concept, like you're saying, Eli, of Jedi is it's fascinating. Because as much as it's changed from 1977 to 2023, it's changed a lot. I think for the good though too, because it expands. It's not black and white anymore, or maybe as some, even myself included, once thought, right? And I like that though. I like them expanding that.
Absolutely. I'm going to fully disclose that when we got those hints in the Ahsoka trailer, Shin saying you have no power, all that kind of stuff, and Sabine with the lightsaber, I'm like, I really hope they don't make her a Jedi. I really don't. I really hope they don't. And not because I don't love Sabine as a character, I just felt like that would have been out of nowhere. But Dave sold me on it. Dave sold me on it so well. And it is in that line that Kanan says in Trials of the Darksaber. The Force is in everyone. You just have to be open to it.
And look, a shameless Rebels plug from your resident Rebels fan here. But
me too, buddy.
Me
too.
Yeah, thank you.
Preach on, brother. Preach on. Preach it.
That also explains why Sabine didn't have difficulty wielding the Darksaber the way that Mando did.
Actually, she did, but okay.
Not in the same way as not in the same way at all as Mando did though. In that episode in Rebels, it's difficult for her at first, but she's not
in Legacy of Mandalore. I'll grant that to you, but Trials of the Darksaber is all about how like how sloppy she is and how she needs to get better eventually.
Yeah, but that's her learning. It looks like she's learning how to handle a lightsaber the same way that Ezra had to.
Yep.
It's not like she's staggering around and I can't even hold it right.
At least she's training with it. Like, never actually trained with it.
Yeah, and that kind of that makes you go, oh, I see what you did there. Maybe a little retroactive. Hey, wait, maybe we can patch this up here as well if we make Sabine be a Jedi. So that was cool as well for me.
Let's see. We have great. Of course, we have one more thing before Obi-Wan and Leia meet up, which is the fantastic line from, of all people, flee somehow. You're not a Jedi anymore, Kenobi. You're just a man.
That's the line I was thinking of.
Ties into what we've been saying about like that pairs so perfectly with the stuff we were talking about with Haja and Leia later on, where Obi-Wan genuinely believes that. And there is still at no point does Obi-Wan turn on his lightsaber in this episode.
Mm-hmm.
But he uses the Force that one time to lift Leia. But all the rest is hand-to-hand combat. All the rest is hand-to-hand combat or blasters or something like that. He is still trying to reclaim the Obi-Wan Kenobi that he once was. And it's not that it's all gone, but you have to work to get it back. It doesn't happen overnight. And speaking of people who are still trying to figure out who they are, I want to talk about our co-protagonist, or main antagonist, you could argue, of this series, Reva, where her conflict specifically with Grandy here is greatly expanded in this episode. And there's that great line, all the power in the world can't mask the stench beneath, which I think really starts to crystallize Reva and her place in this series. Because she is not the hero, obviously. But she's not the villain either. Because the villains hate her. The villains think that she's unworthy of them. And so she is this interesting... She is the chaos agent in this story. And I know that there have been a lot of Fandom Menace shit about, she's stealing the show away from Obi-Wan. I'm ignoring that because it's stupid. But establishing her as that third protagonist, or fourth, I would say, because Obi-Wan, I was thinking Obi-Wan, Leia, and of course Anakin, as this wild card, as this you don't really know what she's going to do next, is really interesting to reflect both off of Obi-Wan and Vader.
I think what's interesting with Reva, especially if we take it into the context of these are the first 2 episodes we get out of the show, right? And we're introduced to this Reva character, right? We in that first episode, we see her, we don't know much. And then, like you're saying, Eli, this episode, we get a little bit more. We get that tension between her and Grand Inquisitor a lot. You can see where they're not on the same wavelength like him and the other 2 Inquisitors. And then you see that she definitely has some other motivations. And you get, again, sprinkles of who was she? Because, again, at this time, we don't know who she is. We maybe all have theories that she could be this or that, like where she come from. He mentions, Grand Inquisitor mentions something about finding her, like, in the gutter or something to that effect. Yeah. So, like, again, you're like, where does she come from? Because, again, at this time,
we don't
in
know.
the show, right, we have no idea. So I think they did a really good job of sprinkling her backstory into the show. And I think that really they do a good job, I think, throughout the series. But this episode is the one that really is interesting to me because, again, her motives are very different than the Grand Inquisitors and everybody else's. She's very hell-bent on getting Obi-Wan back to Vader. And she even, again, the big thing for me in the episode, one of the things is that she basically says, Anakin I know who he turned into. And a lot of people, as far as we know, at the time, don't know that Vader is Anakin Skywalker. She does.
Yeah.
So again, it's like, man, who is she, right? And I think that
Yeah.
she was such a fascinating character for me in the entire series. But again, this episode, especially with that kind of knowledge of her knowing who Anakin was, know who he is, right? That he became Darth Vader, and to throw that into Obi-Wan's face, and know that's going to emotionally change him. I think it's just she's a fascinating character, and I really enjoyed her throughout the series.
She's great. I continue to have more and more respect for Moses Ingram. Top of the increasing amount of respect I had for her before this, not only for her incredible acting in this, but for standing tall against the bullshit that some bigots and hateful people were spewing at her. We talked a lot about this in the last episode, where Ewan. I know I probably shouldn't laugh at this. I just always find it so funny that Ewan was filming that video in his car. I just imagine he was driving and Lucasfilm told him what was happening. I was like, shit, I gotta stop and record this thing on my phone in my car.
He put everybody on blast, and I loved it.
No, it was great. He wasn't at his house. It wasn't like it was in the driver's seat of his friggin' car. That's how angry he felt about this. He had to be in his car doing this. But speaking of Obi-Wan,
can I add one more thing
sure.
to the discussion? I know we touched on this last week, but I'd wonder if you have any thoughts about this as well, Lauren. I think it's horrible, the things that people do and say, and the way that Moses Ingram has been treated online. And I think that there's a media literacy lesson in here, as I said last time, a teachable moment where not if you don't like a character, or if you think that a character is grating or annoying, or sometimes that's on purpose. And I think that's part of her character. And I think that this whole, she is cocky. She is way too overdramatic. She is trying too hard to be intimidating, and it is irritating the people around her, because it's irritating to watch someone do that on TV, just like it is irritating in the real world. It's ridiculous, obviously, goes without saying almost, to turn around, oh, it must be this actor's fault. I gotta go send her angry DMs that's obviously ridiculous. But I think the bigger picture here is like, how do we? It's the biggest picture is stop being fucking racist and misogynist, because we can't talk about this without addressing that this obviously has some, with the track record of geekdoms and fandoms and the internet in general, like, we can't ignore that shit. But beyond that as well, on a less serious level, just think about the characters that you're watching. Some characters are supposed to be funny. Some characters are supposed to be scary. Some characters are supposed to be like irritating and make you roll your eyes a little bit. That's part of it. It's okay. That's what makes her an interesting character. It wouldn't be interesting if she was just it wouldn't be interesting if she was as intimidating as Darth Vader, because that's not who she is.
And that's not who she should be. It's not
we already have an Inquisitor who's trying to be as intimidating as Darth Vader and utterly failing. That's the fifth brother. Never liked the guy.
But to Jacob's point though, it's funny because I think nowadays, when you talk about media literacy, like, it's they want to know the whole character in the first 5 seconds.
Yeah.
Instead of letting the story play out. Because again, just like you were talking about, the reason that she was acting the way she's acting was because, as we learn later on, like, Anakin, like, completely took out her entire, like, Jedi Padawan friends. She barely survives that. She is enraged and wants to get revenge, right? Because of what she saw him do. So her motivations are not going to line up with the Grand Inquisitors and, like, all hail the Emperor and all that. No, dude. She has other motives. And her motives is to get to, again, as we find out, if you let the story play out, kids, you find out her sole motivation was to get Vader. It was to go after Vader. And to pull him out. Like, that was the entire point. And that's why, again, this is why she was going after Obi-Wan. Again, we find this out. But in these first 2 episodes, right, you have to let that she is different, that her motivations are different. But right, you're saying, Jacob, that's part of her character. We're not supposed to be behind her because she is a bad guy, right? She's portrayed as that in these first couple episodes. So yeah, we're not supposed to root for her. But yeah, she's not going to be your typical, because she's not your typical baddie, because again, she clearly has different motives, as we find out, and as this episode tells us that, yeah, dude, she knows more than a lot of people, right? Again, going back to the whole Anakin Vader Anakin stuff. And again, her motivations of not listening to the Grand Inquisitor, because again, she has this whole other plan that she's not telling anybody about, and that we're not aware of yet, because again, the story hasn't been told. We don't know where the series was going. And I would love more background on her. I would love a comic,
give us more
novel,
Reva stories.
something. Yes.
In the past, I would argue in the future. I remember after I finished playing Jedi Survivor, one of my number one wants for Jedi 3 was Reva as a presence in that game. I think
That'd be cool.
Her presence and her journey in collusion with Cal's journey, also struggling, like somebody who's just recently come back with a brush from the dark, and somebody who's still dealing with the darkness inside him, like Cal is something that I think would be really interesting for those two characters to interact with. And I'd love to see Cameron Monaghan and Moses Ingram just go at it.
Oh, that'd be great.
I want to get to when Obi-Wan and Leia finally meet up.
I know we've been going at it for a while. I just need to add one more. I feel obligated to add one more thing, since a lot of what I say about the third sister is this sort of my idea about her. But for what it's worth, like, she's not only an annoying character, and I don't mean to reduce her to that. That's just where my response to what people say about her takes me. She absolutely has her moments beyond that, and we do see her in this episode really gain a lot of attention and recognition from the viewer, especially at the end when you're like, oh my gosh, wait, there's way more if she's willing to straight up try and kill the Grand Inquisitor, like her boss. So something serious is going on here. And so that I'm not trying to, I just want to put it out there that I'm not trying to, I don't know what the word is. I'm not trying to belittle her character or belittle the great job that Moses Ingram did or anything like that by what I'm saying. I'm just saying that's how I interpreted the character. For the record, that's all.
Yeah. No, I get it. I want to get to Obi-Wan and Leia's interactions, which I just... Oh, gosh. There's so many great ones. They're like...
We've just barely cracked into the real meat and potatoes of the show.
I feel like we could make a top 5 for this one of moments from this episode, but 2 that come to me instantly are she'll just get the jacket and the gloves. Only Leia would worry about getting the gloves she likes and make Obi-Wan stay for it. That is, like, I could feel carrying that one. No, we're getting these fucking gloves. We are getting these gloves, and there's nothing you can do about it. And then the typical...
You can tell as well, if I can interject. You can tell as well that Obi-Wan has never engaged in caring for a child before.
Oh, right? Oh, my God.
In any capacity whatsoever. And it's hilarious.
No, he thought it was just going to be drop Luke at his aunt and uncle's house, and you're done.
It's straight up new dad vibes. Like,
yeah.
Until we're off this planet, you will do as I say. Like, dude, good luck. She's dead.
That was the parallel to Leia. That was a parallel to Leia. I don't know if you noticed that.
Oh my gosh, really?
He says, what is it? From now on, you'll do exactly as you're told. You understand. And Leia from A New Hope, I don't know who you are or where you came from, but from now on, you'll do exactly as I tell you. Okay? Wow. To Han. Yeah. No, that's a reference.
Okay, that's amazing. I didn't even
pick
up on that, but that's pretty great. That's pretty great.
Yeah.
It's a real
good. That's awesome.
Yeah, no, they know the Star Wars in here. And then the second line I wanted to bring up was, Fawn was from Toll and you're my daughter. Granddaughter, maybe. What? Nothing.
That was a total
Like,
carry.
That
Total
was
carry.
that was such a Carrie line. I could hear her saying it in my head. Like, we've already talked about how much Vivian brings out that spirit of Carrie Fisher in this series last episode, but I cannot reiterate it enough. God, she is so good. I don't understand how a 9-year-old can have that much talent. It is insane.
She is so good as Leia. To the core of who Carrie and how Carrie portrayed that character, I think Vivian, every note, especially like the lines you're saying, Eli, granddaughter, maybe, it's just so Carrie and just so in the spirit of Leia, though, of how Carrie portrayed that character as the older version of her. It was so spot on. But even those little moments where she wasn't, because there's that moment where Obi-Wan's, what are you, 10? Like, how old are you? And she's like, oh, I'm 10. Like, you don't act like a 10-year-old. And I love that because again, so her character, so Leia. But then you get that moment of her being an actual kid, like, when she's, pressing him about being a Jedi, she's like, I hear Jedi make things float, so make me float. Make me float, old man. Prove it to me. I just love that aspect of how she does it, like being that kid. And then you see that older, more mature, who Leia has always been in some of those deliveries and some of those scenes. And she does such a good job. And I hope we get more of her. I don't know how, when, where. I just want more of Vivian as Leia. She's so good. She's so good.
She is fantastic. And then we get, of course, to that warehouse, which I forgot how hard these scenes hit. Of course, we have Obi-Wan pausing and Leia saying what, and Obi-Wan saying nothing. You just remind me of someone. She was fearless too and stubborn. And
what a
I
moment.
don't know how they would have done it. I really don't. I would have loved a Padme name drop. I really would. Even something as simple as her name was Padme or something like that, just to say the name out loud without having to do this many arm nudges and being like, you know who we're talking about. You know who we're talking about. You know who we're talking about.
I would have loved it too, Eli. I was okay, only because I think in the moment, in the situation, I think Obi-Wan was like, I can't say it. I don't want to, because that's a hard memory for him to even think about too. Even
I know,
probably saying her name out loud.
It's just really still very strange to me that.
Oh, I agree. Yeah,
he is not mentioned in the series at all, not once. And I love this series, and it's an extremely small gripe of mine. Actually, I think we should probably get to the other small gripe of mine now, so I can get it out of the way. Which is, I remember when I saw this for the first time, I was not crazy about it, and I hate it less now. But it's still never going to land the best for me. Reva stabbing Grand Inquisitor was something I never really loved. The tension was immediately dropped by the fact that we know he survives another 4 years until Kanan kills him in Rebels.
Yeah.
And it carries on one of my least favorite Star Wars tropes of people surviving what probably should kill them, and for a story reason that really doesn't. There were other ways to do that than just completely stabbing him. And it's not a big deal. Obviously, we saw that he got back to just in time, and that such.
I get it though. I get what you're saying. You're coming from, Eli, because again, if you're a fan, I think my only argument, or how I guess not argument, but how I think of it as fans, yeah, we know who he is. We know where his story ends as the Grand Inquisitor. But like, if you're a general fan, say for instance, like my parents, my brother, my sister, whatnot, they don't know. So that moment of her killing her boss, it's a shock. If you think of it in that's how I think of it in those terms. Like, yeah, I can see where people are like, oh man, she means business, right? She's serious. Whereas for fans like us, we're like, what was the point of that? We know he survives. He doesn't die for like another 4 or 5 years. What do we do?
The thing I go back to, I think it was Alex Damon describing the first time when he and a bunch of his friends were watching that episode for the first time. And everybody, once when that happened, they turned to him. They looked at him, and he was like describing. He was like, "I was seeing all of the comments I knew I was going to get that next morning about how the hell is Grand Inquisitor dying here and still alive."
Did we ever, yeah. Did we ever get an explanation for how he came back from that?
I don't know if we really got an official one, did we?
We did, and normally I would hate this explanation, but Rupert's friend's delivery of it is so damn good that I don't care. Revenge does wonders for the will to live.
Okay, but that's not a real explanation. Like,
no,
did he just go full Darth Maul and just got?
It's a Maul explanation, and I guess if we're doing it with Maul, everybody loves that guy now for reasons I don't understand. I guess we can do it with Quizzy, who is a infinitely more interesting character, but whatever.
What? Okay, agree. We won't get into this right now. That being
another
said,
episode. That's another episode.
I just don't feel like the Grand Inquisitor is built the same as Darth Maul, who like he's the angriest. He's like probably the angriest Star Wars character ever, if we're being honest.
Oh yeah,
Maul, I'll have to live with it. I'll accept it.
Yeah, no, let's
stop talking. Solo, so
let's stop talking about Darth Mid. We'll get on with that. I want to get to the final beat of this episode, which I thought was handled so beautifully, and it's not even funny how beautiful this was handled. Lord Vader will be pleased. You didn't know. He's alive, Obi-Wan. Anakin Skywalker is alive. One of the biggest bombs of a character moment in Star Wars, arguably, in my opinion, since I Am Your Father in Empire. And it is done so. I love the moment that established it. Obi-Wan's been in hiding for 10 years. He had no reason to suspect that Vader was still alive. Zero. And what I always get back to in this theme is it's Ewan acting his heart out. Those facial expressions on Ewan are perfect. They are stunned, horrified, very saddened, because I imagine he's just now running through all of the horrible things that Anakin must have done as Darth Vader in the galaxy throughout these last 10 years because he didn't finish the job, because he couldn't finish the job. And closing that moment where she's on a transport with one of the characters who he wants to tell the most about this, but can't for her own safety, is just that moment of that last Obi-Wan line in the episode where he just sits back, Leia's like somewhere else in the background, and he goes, it just breaks me. It just breaks me. It is a melancholy recognition that I think was executed so incredibly well.
It's a scene. It's a scene because, again, as hardcore fans as we all are here, that moment just means so much to that character, right? Because that's the first time he is knowing that he survived, that his friend, his best friend, survived that. After what he did to him in Mustafar, he survived and he became this evil dude, right? If for Obi-Wan to get that confirmation, maybe he thought about it, maybe he didn't, who knows? But for him to really be told that Anakin is still alive, that is such a, like you're saying, Eli, that's a big moment. That's a big moment in Star Wars. For the moment that Obi-Wan finds out Anakin is still alive. We have that now. We have that on film.
And it was treated with the gravity that I feel it deserved.
Oh, yeah. And like you're saying, I think his acting was so good in that scene because it was little dialogue from him, all facial.
It was all facial expressions. That was it.
And I think for me, and I know you brought up like he has to be thinking about what he could have stopped. For me personally, how I think he's thinking of it is just disbelief, and just like you're saying, like more sadness than not knowing that what he could have stopped. Because I don't again, he's been away for 10 years. He doesn't know, maybe not, what has been going on in the galaxy, right? Because he's been in hiding. I think it's just him realizing that his best friend is still alive, that he could have probably gone and found him maybe and tried to save him. But he doesn't know what he's done yet. Maybe not, like I said, maybe not. We don't really know. But I don't know if it's so much for him. Maybe later on he probably feels this way though, Eli, that he wish he would have got back into it and maybe stopped him from doing what he did. But I think it's just the realization that because he left his friend just there burning, and he wanted to save him and he loved him as a brother, and for him to realize then that guy is still alive, it's just the heartache, the break, the sadness, I think is
But-
what he's emotionally has to be going through for sure in that moment.
Yeah, and absolutely, it's about the friend. But like the thing, I remember people arguing about this online because they said this before, that Anakin at the start of that Obi-Wan at the start of the series doesn't know that Vader is alive, but he does know who Darth Vader is because he does hear that name on the security holograms, and he knows who Darth Vader was before he killed him. So even though, of course, he wants his friends back, he wants his friend back, he wants his little brother back, basically, he also knows what the Emperor did to him. He also knows what the Emperor did to him, and also what he decided to do himself as well.
Absolutely,
Like,
what he did to him. Yeah.
The person that Anakin chose to become. It's not
Right.
that Anakin's alive. That's not the reveal. It's Darth Vader is alive.
Me, I always, and you're totally right. I've always been the Anakin's Vader, Anakin. I clump them together.
Yeah.
I do too. I'm just saying, like, specifically Obi-Wan doesn't believe that in the moment.
I think, and you're totally right. I think it is more of the Vader name is the thing that clicks, right? It's not the, and obviously she says Anakin later on, but she says Vader first. I'm with you 100% on that. That it's the Vader name that triggers him to think, oh crap, that means my friend is still alive, or Anakin's still alive. That person is still alive. So yeah, I think that triggers the whole emotions and everything like that.
As much as I 100%. Personally don't believe, I personally believe that Vader and Anakin are very much the same person. I don't think that Anakin believes.
Oh, that's an interesting question.
I don't think that Anakin believes that like, I think that Vader's goal was to do, and he says this quite a few times, of like trying to eradicate as much of Anakin Skywalker as possible.
Right, because he knows Anakin, the person of Anakin, is more of the Jedi, the more of the light side person.
Yeah. He wants it to be a secret that he was Anakin. Like, he really invested in making sure that stays a secret.
And I think, and I guess just again, I've always just been that way of Anakin's Vader, Anakin, and I think especially with Hayden and how he has talked about being the character, and he talks about he's brought up the fact that for him as the person playing this character, he has always, and I think he might have said this at Celebration in London in a roundabout way. Again, I'm paraphrasing, but like, he feels that like they are one. Like you're saying, Eli, there is a difference. Right? Vader is not Anakin. They are two separate people. But what Hayden was basically saying is that like he sees them as one,
like two sides of the same coin. No, absolutely. I wasn't trying to get into semantics. I was just saying,
oh no, that's a whole. No, I know what you're saying though.
Yeah. And then I think we should get to Vader himself. What a the ending of Obi-Wan Kenobi Part 2 is a classic example for me, and I think Obi-Wan does this a lot, actually, of something that should not, in theory, in my mind, work. But absolutely does. A Vader suiting up, like a Vader faux suiting up scene at the end of Obi-Wan Kenobi Part 2 could have been done in a way that was so cheesy and build up for build up's sake. But it's this blood pumping, hype building moment. It's, oh no, Anakin has figured it out. He sensed Obi-Wan's back, and that means that Vader is back. And some part of Anakin is back. And I'm just imagining Anakin in that scene, like waking up in the back and the GTA meme, the shit, here we go again meme, it plays in his head as he's just like, oh no, it's Obi-Wan again. God damn it. I'm going to have to deal with this now.
And what a way to end the episode. And again,
Yes.
thinking it in the context of they dropped the first two.
Yeah.
Now we have to wait
Ending
a
it on
week. Now we had to wait a week to
ending-
see what was happening.
Waiting a week to see Darth Vader actually say something, do something to, yeah. And then, of course, we'll get to this next episode with, as I will always affectionately call him, horror movie Vader. The creepy, grotesque stalker that he becomes in that episode on Mapuzo, which I'm so excited to dig into because it is a side of Darth Vader that I never knew I needed. But yeah, no, it's a great ending to the episode. We've gotten to the end of this episode. I think Lauren and I have expressed our unwavering love for this episode. Actually, I'm going to turn to Jacob first because I think your opinions have been a bit more mixed than us, so feel free to correct me.
No, I think you're right. I do have mixed feelings about this episode, but overall, especially after talking about it with you all and hearing and benefiting from what you guys have to say and your insights that I may not have picked up on, there's a lot to love in this episode. And ultimately, I think in my mind, it suffers from pretty much the same problems that overall kind of hold Kenobi back for me from really being on my top level, my top shelf of what I consider my personal favorites in Star Wars. I mean, that being said, there is a lot of great stuff in this episode. Those final scenes are magnificent. It really is a treat getting to see it's getting to see Obi-Wan and Leia do their thing. I expressed that I didn't love what it did for the overall execution of the episode, but Kumail Nanjiani, really interesting character, really thought-provoking and very funny, and a fun addition. So overall, I thought it was a really creative, it was a very creative and energetic episode with a lot of heart and a lot of memorable moments. And I think that with that in mind, I can forgive that the execution wasn't at the level of some other great moments in Star Wars. That's what I think about this episode. So I'll hand it over to you guys now.
That's really fair, Jacob. I think, again, as a single episode in Star Wars, it had some good moments for sure. And even in the series, I think Eli, you said it before too. It's not my personal favorite either, but it's still good. Like those last few minutes are so good.
For perspective, I'm gonna put it like this, okay? They did a ranking over at the Bombad cast they did a tier list rank their live action Star Wars episodes. And I had more mixed thoughts on Book of Boba Fett and Andor and Mandalorian. There were some F tiers in there, there were some A tiers, there were some B tiers occasionally, maybe even some C tiers sometimes. This was my Obi-Wan Kenobi. SASS. The worst that Obi-Wan could get is A tier, which is still the second highest tier for me. That is how brilliant this show is. I understand that there are people who don't love the show. I understand that, and this is not the place for them right now because I'm going off about this show. This show is, I think also it's quite a big contrast for me because we're coming from Solo, which is a movie that I very much enjoy, but Solo and Obi-Wan Kenobi for me are night and day.
That's fair.
Where I have some issues with Solo, but there are of course also great moments in that movie, of course. But this is just volume here a little bit. Yeah, some canon stuff a little bit. But other than that, just perfection all across the board. Hitting the beats of these characters, hitting the beats of these themes over and over again.
Yeah, this episode is really, again, I think it was a good two, again, in context of them dropping these two together. It was a good way to end that. with this episode, right? Because then I think from this episode moving forward, it really, I think for me, the series picks up and the story gets better. You have a lot of other different, like, more information on Reva and everything that comes throughout the rest of the series. But I think especially this episode, I think it really sets the tone of, okay, this is where we're going, right? It sets the adventure. Whereas in the first episode, it like you guys talked about, it sets the scene, right? It puts the players on the chessboard. We see where everybody's at, and then this episode takes off and starts that journey. This Star Wars, yeah, 100%.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's going to be it for this episode of Star Wars in the Galaxy. Next week, of course, we're going to be doing part 3 of Obi-Wan Kenobi with first-time guest of Star Wars in the Galaxy. Somehow, I don't understand how this man is coming on for his first time as a guest of Star Wars in the Galaxy, given how much both of us have had to do with him in the past year. We are getting the greatest trivia player of all time, the Bombad man himself, Mr. Scotty J-Ro.
Oh boy.
On Star Wars in the Galaxy for part 3. Yes, we are covering the Darth Vader horror scenes with a guy who once stood on an Anaheim balcony in a Paul Stanley cosplay and yelled at people at downstairs who were just trying to like go to Disneyland.
Oh, I love that man.
People in the back, let me.
That's gonna be a good episode. I can't wait to listen to that one.
I fucking love that man. Anyway, but until then, Lauren, where can we find you?
Yeah, thanks for having me on. This is always fun. I love talking Star Wars, especially with you guys. So thanks for having me on. You can follow me on Twitter, X, whatever you want to call it now. All the social media platforms, really. You can follow me at Low Knows. And then you can follow the Galactic Podcast at the Galactic Pod on all the social media platforms. And we're on Apple Pod, Google Play, Spotify, all the major platforms. So go check it out. That's me and my cousin do the Galactic Podcast. And we have some fun talking about Star Wars over there. So check us out. Go listen to us.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Lauren, for coming on here. You can find us everywhere at In a Galaxy Pod on all social medias. You can listen to us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts. If there's not a podcast service that we're on, please email us at fwinagalaxy@gmail.com, where you can email us with your questions and trivia and fun facts if you want. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. I have, as of this is the first recording that I've since I've begun to do this. I am right now. I got off of it a long time ago. I know I sucked about it, but I've been posting our backlog of episodes en masse to YouTube from 80 episodes before now, from our episode 41, which posted as of this recording yesterday. One will be coming out every day on YouTube. I've been rolling them out. I've just been like putting graphics over them. My computer probably hates me from all of that exporting, and that Final Cut is done. But no, this is the second day I've done straight of doing this. No, sorry, the third day I've done straight of doing this. And I'm already up to about a year ago. This will probably be out on YouTube by June, probably. Something like that. But yeah, and watch Epic Confrontations on the Star Wars in the Galaxy YouTube channel. We should have our next episode, Andy versus Brandon, coming out very soon. And until next time, I think all there is to say is may the Force be with you. Always.
Always.